The editor of the book, Anita Mani, will be in conversation with Gayathri Sreedharan. Gayathri Sreedharan completed her PhD from CSIR CCMB, Hyderabad, on understanding the host pathogen dynamics between chytrid fungus and amphibians in the northern Western Ghats. While most of her work in the Western Ghats was counting frogs, she also loved taking long walks in the forest, listening to the stories and traditions of the people, and observing their changing relations with the forests. She enjoys writing down snippets of these evolving conversations between forests and its people in her field diary to reminisce and collect them as reference for future stories.
Anita Mani. So what I'll do first is like my flow into the conversation would be got to know her maybe a few days back when we were discussing about this conversation that we are going to have in front of all of you. So I'll start from what we all know about her. Like I'll read what I first got to know about her. So what interested me the most is that her work and journey is often compared to a migrating bird. And she has oscillated from writing for different print media and to a corporate career, and she got back to writing. So she also ran something called the Child Friendly News, which is discussing current affairs for children. So that is what I know about her. I knew about her before we started conversation with her about books or people that might have inspired her in her journey to be a birder, to love nature, and also to bringing out a book so solid like this. So thinking about what has inspired me, I was thinking that in 8th or 9th standard, I got hold of a book called Leelavati's Daughters. So that is a Indian Academy of Science publication. And that was the first time where the fact glared at me that, oh, women are so underrepresented when it comes to science in general. And this is wildlife science that we are talking about. And for times immemorial, our narratives have been around, shaped by men, of course, especially in this field. So I wanted to start the conversation with Anita by asking about people or books that might have made her wonder about these questions and inspired her in her journey.
Okay, thanks, Gayatri. I don't have a clean answer to that, unfortunately. And my favorite analogy from the days that I used to write about technology and media and things like that was that when satellite television was launched in India in the 1990s, I think it took analysts and programmers quite some time to figure out that viewership was not channel driven, it was really program driven. That's what drew people in. And I think that's sort of true for me when I say that it's bits and pieces of various people and various things that have sort of inspired me. So I don't have a clean answer that says that this is the person that really turned the switch for me hard. But I've always loved good writing. Though for the longest, I've turned to non-fiction only in the last 10 years or so. I think before that I was devoutedly a fiction person and couldn't understand why people even read non-fiction. But the tables have truly turned because now I run an imprint that brings out non-fiction books. So yes, I think great writing in nature inspires me. I think we have good, solid examples of that from both India and overseas. I totally enjoy reading. Well-written fiction on non-fiction on nature and science, and writers like Tim D. I love to read because their writing is so lyrical. You also have high quality publications, compendium publications brought out by the New Yorker, by magazines overseas, which celebrate science and nature, which I enjoy reading because it's the shorter form of the narrative rather than the longer essay form or the longer novel form. I think in India, plenty of writers to be inspired by. There was Krishnan who wrote beautifully on birds. Really, Salim Ali wrote with a lot of clarity. I love reading Zai Whittaker because she's so funny. And my favorite author from Hyderabad is in the audience. He's also someone whom we published last year, Ashish, who's, I think, writes with such beauty and grace about birds. So I think great amount of great writing inspires me rather than a specific person or or a specific novel, so to speak. Yeah.
Talking about your migratory landscape, like that is what I would be calling your journey. So, what would you tell me about your transition from your early career, which involved media, corporate, and then to being a publisher now, editor, author? So, can you tell me how that happened over the years? Because all of us have had transitioned from very completely different fields. For example, I am a microbiologist by training, but that has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now. So how have you adapted, and how has this journey been from corporate career and nature, and all these look very not connected at all. So
They're not. So the really funny thing is that when I was way back in school and I was in class 1, 2, 3, 4, primary school, all through, I was determined that I would be a journalist because my grandfather was one, and I was determined that I would, fly the family flag, so to speak, and that was my single-minded purpose right through 3 years of undergraduate education, a year, and my postgrad education, which also happened in mass media. And then after 5 years in journalism, I started switching. And changes were really organic. And I think at each point, I just felt that I wanted to learn something different. And I was lucky to find those chances. And I kept taking them. I think that's what it's essential. There was no plan to this at all. But the return to writing was really the one plunge that I took back. I missed writing. Because for me, writing is a way of understanding the world around me. And I think the corporate job, you were writing a lot of technical stuff, which is not necessarily, meaningful beyond a very limited scope. But having said that, even today, I continue to write on technology. I do work for other people. I do projects because it keeps me in touch with what's happening in science, what's happening in AI, what's happening in technology. And I think that diversity is really important because I see I see how technology is making a big change in the way we understand science. Wildlife and nature. It's increasingly become technology and AI driven and algorithm driven. So like I said, the only conscious decision I've taken in my work life is to make a switch to come back to writing and books. I think everything else has been just taking opportunities that came along the way. But the biggest regret I have, I think it's the world's cruelest irony, is that for a long time I worked for a software company, and they had operations all across Africa, Brunei, all the places where the loveliest birds live. Brunei Darussalam, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, Morocco, West Africa, everywhere where birders flock to see some of the world's most beautiful birds, and I wasn't interested in birds then. And think of all the missed opportunities that I've had, in terms of what all, and I was running projects in all these countries, and I was so stupid enough not to seize the chance, and I think there were far more birds and more accessible then than they are today, so really life has played me a cruel trick, so.
yeah, I think that happens to a lot of us because from my experience, I liked ecology and I wanted to do work in ecology, but finally I worked on frogs. And I was also talking about this to Anita. Frogs are not something that I ever wanted to lay my hands on. So when I first had the opportunity to touch a frog, I was really irked by the experience, but later, now 5 years into being with frogs, I'm very fascinated by them, and I would go anywhere to see a different frog, or any frog for that matter. So I also wanted to ask you, like when we talk about the wild now, so now we've covered your journey from being a journalist to being in a corporate industry, and then finally having a book like this. So where did the wild part of you start? Like, which was your first field experience, somewhere that you've gone in the wild? And what was a very specific experience that you can talk, which probably was a seed to writing this book or compiling this book? Is there something like that you can talk about?
Sure. I wasn't, like I said, the same way that I came to non-fiction really late, I came to wildlife really late. I mean, we've all done the occasional family trips. I remember seeing leopards from Elephant Back in the 90s in Corbett and watching fish owls also in Corbett in the 90s, but those were all just random trips. But in a sense, my journey with birding and to a broader canvas of nature really began with my son because he got interested in birds at the age of 4. He was too young to be sent off alone to various places. So, in a sense, I was chaperone, companion, and then I got hooked. I didn't realize that this was so alluring, and yeah, so now my son and I continue to travel together to watch birds. He's a far better birder than I ever will be. Don't claim to even be the 10% of the bird watcher or his understanding of the science of birds is. But yeah, so that's how, in a sense, I landed in this space and I started going out and watching birds. The first birds that we watched together were the birds in our own garden because somebody had given us a book, which is what my son used to essentially identify the birds in the garden around. And so my first bird, I think, was the magpie robin, then it was the bulbuls, all common species that I'm sure that you find in Hyderabad gardens as well. Yeah.
So, why these stories? Like, what is your inspiration, or what led you to write stories about these women now? Like, the now part of the question is especially important for somebody like me who's just started out in the field, because today is a time where you really don't see a lot of connection between people or children, youngsters, or even people of our age not so much interested in nature, are not ready to go for far lengths to see something or do something in the wild. Conservation, ecology, evolution, all those topics covered. So, and a lot of things happen in the lab these days in research. So, why did you think these stories are especially relevant to be told in today's world, especially with all the changes that has constantly happened in the field, and with respect to the way we study these organisms, many things have evolved. So why did you think it's necessary that these stories be told today, and why these stories?
Can I borrow your book? Yeah. Okay, I've forgotten to bring mine. So the trigger for this book was really the picture that's on the cover. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this and do get a chance to maybe borrow Gayathri's copy and take a look at the photo. It's a beautiful photo. I saw this photo for the first time, and I think it was in Sanctuary magazine when they talked about women scientists, and I was hooked. I was like, who is this, absolutely, this clearly curious, inquisitive, intelligent person? I mean, something about that face and the sheer energy in the photograph really hooked me. And I started finding out more. This is actually a photo of J. Vijaya, a herpetologist, I think probably India's first female herpetologist who worked extensively at the Crocodile Bank and the Snake Park and the Crocodile Bank in Chennai. Researching all manners of herbs, and who's most famously known for rediscovering a long lost turtle species, which was subsequently named after her. So Viji's story, and her story is really tragic because, that's one of the most moving tales in the book, written by Zai Whitaker, who worked with her for many years at the Crocodile Bank. And Viji suffered from schizophrenia, and finally she killed herself because she couldn't deal with it anymore. And she died really, really young, but did incredible amount of work in her short lifespan of about 30 years. And that story totally hooked me. And I started reading up more, finding out more. And when I launched the Indian Pitta imprint in about 2 years ago with Juggernaut, I was very clear that I wanted to write about Viji's life. I thought enough people didn't know about the kind of work that Viji had done, about her science and her contributions to the field. And then the ideas began to roll in terms of what else could, who were the other women out there doing seminal work, and there were so many, really. And that's how the idea for this book sort of came together, because women in science in India are not much written about. I mean, they are, and I think testimony to the fact that the book opens with a chapter on Jama Lara, And I don't know if any of you know of Jamal. I mean, how many of you in this audience would know of Salim Ali? Would you raise your hands? So we normally call him the Birdman of India. But how many people would have heard of Jamal Ara, who was anointed by Salim Ali as the Bird Woman of India? I think there are only a handful of people who would actually have known of Jamal's work. And like I said, she was on my long list, but couldn't find anyone who knew anything about her. And I think um, there was very little published information about her. No one even knew how she looked. And I think serendipity led me to Raza Kazmi, who did a wonderful profile of Jamal Ara in the book. The book opens with Jamal Ara's story. It's the first published information on her life, her contributions, and possibly even her first photograph ever published. And the curious thing is that the photo of Jamal Ara that is featured in the book actually came from her gas cylinder booklet. That was the only photo left, because in a fit of anger, pique, and I think overall distress, and I think Jamal also suffered from mental health issues, was that she made a bonfire of all her work a few years before she died, and with that went a lot of unpublished material, diaries, notes, and photographs. So we finally, luckily, the gas cylinder booklet survived and lived to tell the tale, which is now in the book. So and I think that's the fact that I was just surprised that nobody had done a book like this before, because these stories are so wonderful and so inspiring at so many levels. So yeah, so that's how the book. Long answer to I think your question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's. So she was talking about Vijaya. So like her, many of us, even though we are, I cannot still call myself a herpetologist, but I'm somebody who's aspiring to be a herpetologist. And as a herpetologist, woman herpetologist myself, I have not heard of Vijaya. I don't know her story. That was the first time I read about her in this book. But we all knew Vijaya because we knew it with the species, Vijayachala sylvatica, was named after somebody called Vijaya, but we did not know who Vijaya was. So this book actually educated me in that respect. So we heard your story about how like this particular picture of Vijaya actually put the seed for your book. So I was curious myself, because this book has a compilation of some of the best women wildlife scientists. So I was interested in knowing how your paths probably crossed with them sometime, or I'm sure that you might not know most of them or all of them, but like how, can you give me a few examples for our audience here also, like what were some of your encounters with these women?
Well, prior to the book, I knew none of them. Okay. I mean, since I didn't know any of them personally, but I knew of their work. I think that was the sort of starting point. And and let me say it, and I say this each time I talk about the book. This book is by no means an exhaustive list of women in wildlife sciences. The list is really long. I mean, I had a very long list, but I think my publisher had a budget, so we could only stick to a certain number of essays that we could cover in the anthology. And I was very, very clear that that these would be long form essays, because I think when I put down when I tried to make the long list into a short list, a very dear friend who unfortunately passed on about a year ago told me, Anita, all this is fine, but he said you have to have criteria in terms of who you want in the book. What's the criteria that they have to meet to be able to feature in a book, which is going to be the first anthology of this kind. And you need the criteria to justify not only to your publisher, but also to yourself, in terms of why these women are in the book. So that made me sit down and think about why I had intuitively put some of these women in the list. And I think the criteria essentially was, we wanted to talk about women whose work had significant outcomes in landscape and species conservation. Fundamentally, that was it. So, interestingly, I think while we talked about, well, for me, the criteria was outcomes. What really shone for me at the end of the book was the journeys. Because what really does not matter is what was achieved. And that's really important. That's how society sort of weighs you and understands you. But in a sense, what really matters are the journeys, are the inflection points, and the way these women have sort of gotten through some of these issues. And so subsequent to the book, I've met with most of them. I've been lucky enough to do that, and have had long conversations with those I haven't had a chance to meet yet. And really, I mean, I think, and this book has really been the catalyst for me to understand that there's so much excellent work really happening out there by women, which is not really talked about or celebrated. Yeah.
Sure. So another thing is that, like in your book, The Women in the Wild, while I've not completely read the book, but many of its chapters I've been able to read through. So as a wildlife researcher, as having had done a PhD with fieldwork in the Western Ghats, what I really liked about this book is that it's raw honesty. Like, it was not a book where people looked at wildlife science as something that is with a lot of heroism, or you go there and do that, and people tell that about you, and that comes in the newspaper. It was not coming from that angle at all. And most of the struggles of these women have been portrayed with utter honesty. Why I'm saying utter honesty is because some of the things I could really relate to in this book, especially the chapter on Uma Ramakrishnan, where she was telling that when she had done all a PhD that she was not really interested in doing, but she stuck through it. And then she did a postdoc. And then she came back to India to start her career in NCBS in carnivore biology, which what Uma, in her words, told it as an old boys' club. So to a great extent, that really resonated with me, because we women, young early career women, especially in herpetology, I would say, we do not really have a women scientists to look up to. Like, we don't have many women in that scene at all. So that part resonated with me a lot. And also the chapter on Divya Karnad, where she was working with the fishing community. And she had a lot of resistance from the community for what she was doing with the fishes, the marine life in the coasts. So as a wildlife researcher, these were the few moments when I felt like, yeah, this is true, this happens. So you not being from the field itself, what were some of the things that probably came as a surprise or shock to you from any of these chapters, or maybe even from the stories of women that you could not probably include in the book?
I mean, well, one thing you realize very early on, that wildlife sciences is a long, hard day's work. And I'm saying this, I mean, I think, like I said, I'm a hobbyist bird watcher. I mean, not a scientist by any length of description. And I was recently traveling with my son, who's far more intrepid than I am. And we were somewhere in northeastern India. Our day began at 3 a.m. to get to a particular patch of lowland rainforest, where we spent a good half of a morning, minus food, drink, or rest, looking for certain species of birds, some of which we found, some of which we did not find, no matter. It involved scrambling up and down slopes, which were almost, to me, vertical, but for him, who left with gazelle-like felicity across the various, said, why are you so slow? You know, so that happened for until about 10 a.m. By 11:30 a.m., we were back at the wetland, where we jumped into a boat to look for more ducks, and looking for several ducks which we had not seen before, of which we found one, but didn't see many others. By now it was scorching hot, very humid, and of course no food or water had been consumed. So I was already on the precipice of a very nasty headache. So finally we turned around, and having the ducks were exhausted, we said, okay, the ducks are exhausted, they're not showing up. We're going to go back and take rest for 2 hours and then try our luck in the afternoon. So quick lunch break, thank heavens. So we are fed and watered, and off we went to the grassland patch to look for the most skulking grassland birds I have ever seen in my life. Did not want to come out and show themselves. No, thank you. We spent about 3 hours marching past the same patch of grassland, hoping that our presence would be magnetic enough to lure out these real skulkers. And finally, I saw a leg, I saw a beak, I saw part of a tail, and I pieced together the whole bird. I mean, I wasn't quick enough with my binoculars to catch the 1-2 minute, Rajnikant appearance that it made on a balcony, just to show us, oh, actually it's me, come and take a look. And the day I think ended at about 8 p.m., by which time it was too dark to do anything. And then we attempted to look for some owls as well, at which point I threw in the towel and said, I'm going back to the hotel. And this is hobby. So imagine you're a scientist doing this on a 24/7 cycle because you have data to collect, you have reports to write, you have funds, you have sponsors you are answerable to, you have to raise funds for the next project. It's not easy. And you can't, and the pay isn't great. I think Gayathri will also sort of agree with me on this. And funds are hard to come by. So why would you do this if not for the love of it? Why would you do this if not for the sheer passion of it? I think that really sort of gripped me, I think, while we edited these essays and put the book together. And so, in a sense, and like Gayathri talks about the example of Uma, and I think she did an entire PhD on an area which is not of core interest to her. How do you do that? I think there's some fairly, so like I said, I came into the book thinking I was going to learn a lot. I think I learned so much more than I thought I would, and I was so inspired. I mean, that was really the lesson or the big takeaway from doing the book.
So really, like with you, the perspectives of what is wildlife science has really changed in the process of doing the book. Like, how has it really made you think differently about wildlife science or conservation for that matter, as you were in the journey of editing, writing, publishing this book?
Okay, I mean, that's a key point. I think one is that one theme that sort of links a lot of the essays in the book is about the importance of communities in conservation, or people. For a long time, I think conservation dialogues have been about creating inviolate spaces for wildlife, which is, I think, given that we live in a country of 2 billion people, inviolate spaces are needed. We cannot eschew that point of view completely. But increasingly, because of burgeoning populations, pressures on land and habitats, I think most successful biologists are the ones who are able to address the larger issues of people, communities, and conservation in one prism. And biologists who stand up for communities as much as they stand up for species, many of them are featured here. I think that was a big learning process for me. And I think that's an important direction for the whole conservation debate. I wrote 2 essays in the book. One of them was this essay on Divya Karnad, who works on marine wildlife. And Divya talks about this really nerve-wracking incident in a beach in Orissa, where she was surrounded by angry fishermen who were questioning her for what she was doing, because she was actually collecting data for her master's project. And it turned out that the fishermen were really angry because research on turtles was preventing them from fishing in their waters for 6 months of the year. That's a serious livelihood issue. It's like me being told as a journalist that you cannot publish for 6 months of the year. I'm like, what? Or an airline being told that you can only fly for 2 hours in a day. I mean, these are livelihood issues, and I think we'd be foolish to look the other way. And I think I think that was a turning point for Divya's work, in terms of the fact that she decided then that she would not only focus on wildlife and conservation, but also look at communities that coexisted with wildlife to be able to understand how to create conservation strategies that would work, because one wasn't going to work without the other. I think stories like that, I think, were key inflection points of learning for me. And I think they're also key themes, I think, as India tries to look for conservation strategies that work in a country where population is booming, development is booming, and habitats are unfortunately not booming. Yeah.
Yeah. Very rightly said, Anita. And one thing that I also would like to add from what Anita was saying is that it's really true that funds come through very scarcely for us in this field. And also with the latest report about women in STEM, which was published also by CSIR last year, they say that there is some kind of a huge disparity in the amount of grants or funds that women procure as opposed to men scientists. And is it really because women don't do good work? And their answer was no. So they were also finding that women also publish at par with the men in the same institutes. And what was surprising is that these women, in fact, had grants and awards from international associations. So that kind of put this question into my head, whether it's really about our country not able to see these women or support them, especially in the context of this particular theme, wildlife. It's a really difficult game to get money. And one thing, coming from a field of herpetology, I can say this with confidence, that it's even harder to procure funds because our species is not megafauna as it is described, and it's not a charismatic species. It's a frog. So it's difficult to get grants. So in spite of all that, we try to stick through only because, yeah, we are really interested in what we do and we love what we do. Also like the male counterparts in our field. Yeah, so one question that I again was interested in hearing from you is that, so when we start something like wildlife career, so now in the book it is written that now there are a lot of institutes which offer wildlife biology degrees, like there are MSc in wildlife, PhD in wildlife from Wildlife Institute of India, SACONS, NCBS, they have a very good MSc program in wildlife biology. So it looks like we study something. So we also had coursework when we started PhDs. So, but talking about grants, how to write one and how do you procure one, and what are the very difficult challenges, something that we encounter when we are on foot in the field. These are things that people probably don't talk about in a classroom. So my impression from the book was also that, so this is kind of a chapter on all of that. And I was wondering if your interactions with any of these authors later, these conversations came up, like how the classroom is really not going to equip you for your career in the wildlife. Is that also one of the reasons you think why women probably don't take this science up?
Well, I'm not talking about adoption here, but I think more in terms of women who have embraced the field as a career choice and going forward from there. I think where institutional coaching doesn't exist is in terms of gender issues. Not so much in terms of, I think the men, I think have as tough a time of it in raising money as the women do. I think all the men scientists I know still complain about how difficult it is to, it is competitive. There are many projects chasing very few grants. I don't think that's a gender issue, but what is the fact that when you go out as a women wildlife biologist into the field, there are a lot of issues around safety, around harassment, around discrimination, and these are the things that that institutes don't prepare you for at a formal level. I mean, this is not taught. This is not discussed. So you learn in the field, which is a rotten way of doing it, because every woman out there goes through the same issues of predation, harassment, discrimination, and safety. And they go, the same learning curve is done, it's the same learning curve ladder is climbed every year by a new set of women, which shouldn't be the case. It's like we're not learning from our experiences, we don't share. And there aren't enough women in leadership positions in field biology to be able to make a substantive change. Because if people in leadership positions are not facing these kind of issues, it's very unlikely that they're going to be addressed at a fundamental, at a foundational level, at an institutional level. I think that's where gender, I think, has a larger role rather than, I would say, in terms of raising grants or, in a sense, that's the operational aspect of the work they do. This is very much a big part of the operational work, but which is not really given that much importance to.
True, that's very right what you said. So what I also was in, my impression from reading the book is probably it is a lesson on all those things that you might encounter as a woman field biologist in the wild. And nothing else, like women usually, yes, there is, from the previous session I was listening to that, they were saying that there is no group where you, 15, 20 people together gather and discuss about what has happened to them in this particular field, and with respect to discrimination or harassment, or what are the other challenges, be it scientific only or technical challenges. So there is no group, and probably this book can show us a way to probably start a community like that, where women field biologists, women scientists of all capacities can be together and address these issues. So at least generations, younger generations who want to do this kind of work are equipped better. They have better sight of what might be coming at them. Also, another thing that I found very interesting to ask and listen to you, listen from you, is so we are talking about conservation, landscape, psychology, all of that in this book, mostly from the side of the women. So is there any, in the bigger picture of conservation, is there, what is the role of this gendered narrative? As you were saying that most of our stories around conservation, wildlife, and even the crosstalk or the three-way dialogues between communities, policymakers, and scientists have all been dominated probably by men for all the time. Not probably, definitely by men. So this gendered narrative around conservation, how is it going to help the bigger picture? That's something that I wanted to listen from you.
I think there's a phrase that's been running in my head for quite some time in the aftermath of the book. And the question popped into my head fully formed, so to speak. And the question that came to my mind was, does the shikra see a she? Now, the shikra is a raptor, it's a bird of prey. Now, is the bird aware that the person watching it is a female or a male? Does it matter to the species? Now, there are no I've tried looking up, I've tried reading up, there are no conclusive answers on something like this, but what I've learned from doing this book is that while there are no gendered values, I think women in the field have certain qualities that certainly seem to unite their work. I think one of these is empathy in spades. Two is a huge focus on teamwork. A lot of the women in the book insisted that the essays list their field assistants, their workers, their partners, and these are people in the larger team of science and authorship and publication often get left out. Typically publications will headline the writers, but the field assistants who are actually going to help you collect a lot of that really valuable data, without whom you wouldn't be able to collect data to confirm or not ratify your hypothesis, are rarely mentioned or rarely even acknowledged in the scientific process. Several of the women insisted that we do that because for them that was a key part of their beliefs. So I think these, while I wouldn't go as far as to say these are all gender-driven values, I think we're seeing a lot more of these values of empathy, participation among women in the field. And to go back to my own question in terms of does the shikra see a she, I think as a hobbyist bird watcher, we bird watch in mixed groups, of course. And I've seen even people who are devoutly passionate about birds and wildlife do incredibly stupid things, like walk into a field, get closer to a bird so you can take a better photograph. We've heard horror stories about how people have thrown stones at birds to make them fly so they can get the flight shot. But across all these many painful incidences over many years, I've never seen a woman do it. So I think my question is partly answered. Yeah?
Yeah. I agree with the part where you said that probably women bring more empathy into the game. But that's one part of it. And also I feel that I don't know if it's a biological tendency. I was also discussing it with many of my female colleagues about this particular question. I do not know if it's a biological tendency for us that we are more comfortable with showing off our vulnerabilities. And when you work with the communities, and when you are openly talking to them about your problems or insecurities with working there, they somewhere along the way, they might tease you and they might make fun of you in the beginning. but somewhere along the way they share their vulnerabilities too with you, and that sometimes that makes a good team in the field. So I agree with the part that many women believe that their teams should be equally credited for the work they do. And so before we open it to the audience for questions, I also wanted to ask how do you look at conservation? Like what is your, like I would call it a thesis. I mean, I've written a PhD thesis, but this is almost like a thesis. So how do you look at conservation?
I think I like to answer that by saying that my perception of conservation has changed from something that is done by a group of people in a specific habitat far away from me in remote areas, to something that I think as people living in a highly challenging environmental scenario is something that we ought to practice in all our lives. I think conservation in terms of your urban spaces, because so much of India lives in urban spaces. So I think it's really important to think about conservation in an urban context in terms of what we can do to reclaim some of the spaces so that we can offer spaces for non-human animals. I think that's how my understanding of conservation has changed in the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah. So also, Anita, I was very interested to know which is your. I probably am not allowed to ask this question, but which is one of your favorite stories, or would you like to read an excerpt or something from?
No, I think we'll. I mean, I cannot claim favorites for the stories because, but I did, like I said, for me, this Vijaya story is really close to my heart because it triggered the book. I think that's as far as I'll go. But before I read, maybe we should throw it open for questions in case anybody wants. My guess is you were birding somewhere near Latpanchar, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and Latpanchar is actually a really positive example in some ways because I went to Latpanchar last year. I was there last summer, and it's a village whose economy runs on bird tourism. You know, it began as a sleepy plantation for cinchona, which is for, I think, derivatives used in malarial drugs. But today, the key economy runs on hornbill tourism because it's very easy to see rufous-necked hornbills there, which are otherwise difficult to see in other parts of India. So, in a sense, it's great because everybody is very oriented towards preserving the bird and ensuring that people come to see. Because if the bird is not there, the tourism is not going to happen. Because every third house in Latpanchar is now a homestay. You know, but the flip side is that there is this, guides who feel that they have to serve up the 20, 30 birds that Ratpanchar is famous for because otherwise clients go back upset, then clients won't come back. Now that's an issue. And that's an orientation, I think, which is really something driven by consumers, like bird watchers like us. And I think we need to change the narrative. We need to say that it's okay to not see the bird, but let's not do this. I think more people like you start saying it, then maybe, or maybe like I also don't take photographs. So my first statement to anybody where I'm going is I don't need to see the bird against a green background or in the sky against the blue background to take the photo. That's not my need. I just want to be able to see, understand the bird in relation to its habitat. That's why I go watch birds. I mean, everybody, but I think as more of us, like in any kind of alternate universe, as long as people realize that there are alternate ways of looking at nature, at wildlife, I think, I don't write fiction. I don't have the courage for it, honestly. No, I brought out a news and current affairs publication for children, which is purely non-fiction. So while I enjoy reading fiction, my publications have all been non-fiction, always.
Thank you so much for the questions and your perspective on our conversation in the book. We can take more questions.
What she was an example of calling out is a better option than the one you stoning and making the birds come out. It's a better option. Sorry, I was a little late. In fact, I missed the first part, so maybe I'll have to buy the book. Then I'll get. Just want to know whether have you been to wetlands? Any of the wetlands like Kolleru or?
I've been to wetlands more in the northern part. I live in Delhi, where we have several wetlands. Yeah.
A very sad story about. We have one such wonderful wetland, supposed to be the pride of Asia, in a place called Kolleru in West Godavari district. It's all sadly diminished in size. Birds as far as from Siberia is to come. So anyway, I think just curious to know whether you have been to made a study of, because it's both from the bird watching as well as the wildlife perspective. I thought.
No, true. Wetlands are, I mean, I think among the most threatened ecosystems because they are, many of them happen in, at least in the north. I come from Delhi and a lot of the wetlands are in close proximity to the city or were in close proximity to the city, which makes them development magnets, right? So, so that's, a lot of that does, go. In fact, we'll be talking about some of these issues in the afternoon as well. When we talk about biodiversity and climate change, I think wetlands are something we plan to talk about. So I hope you will join us then for that too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I would like to ask what could be the possible suggestive solutions to the challenge that these women who work in wildlife conservation or wildlife, what could be some of the possible suggestive solutions?
I think to some extent, I think the answers are coming from the women themselves. I think there are far more, at least for the younger lot of biologists who are now, and I'm saying there are a lot more women in the field, not just as biologists, but as people doing photography, people taking films, people writing, educators. There are women in various aspects of the field now, and I think there are coming together social media-driven groups where these women have found a voice. And I think that has really helped. I think there are now platforms where they can talk, and that is one way, because articulating the problem, bringing it out of the closet, so to speak, is one way of actually dealing with the issue and actually finding solutions for it. Because of the number of women now graduating and joining the field, I think these questions are now beginning to be asked. I think that is the starting point of any change. And I think the sheer number of women in the field is what made me also think it was the right time for a book like this, because it's a good time to look back and historically look at the kind of women who have done, what are the challenges that they have faced. The sad news is some of those challenges have not gone away at all. But that triggers the debate. I think the conversations have begun to happen, and I think that is the starting point of change. So I hope by the time we do a subsequent anthology of stories, we'll be talking about a different set of challenges and not the same.
Yeah, that book is going to be inspirational for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for asking the questions, and thank you, Anita. Okay.
They can't hear you behind.
Oh, just a follow-up to the previous question, and based on what you said about low women numbers in STEM, how do you change incentives for more women to be on field? And
it's a hard one to answer. I mean, in the sense that one, I think
kind of
hard. See, one is, I mean, books like this, I hope, like make more young women, make the field more enticing for young women. Okay. And I think there are a lot of young people looking for a career in field biology now. But I think your question was, how do we make change happen? I think
tragedy of hormones and how it has low demand in nature. So
yeah, I mean, those are very big questions which I think beyond the scope of this book, and certainly, I mean, I'm no expert to be able to give you such a broad answer on something like that. But I think, but what I do know is change begins when conversations happen. I think that's the one thing I firmly believe in. I think that's by talking about it at any level, in this context about women in the field, I think one can talk about the kind of work environments in which women want to work in, right? You can fashion the field by changing the narrative. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, I know that only partly answers what you asked, but I think yeah. But if I really had an answer to that question, I should be doing something quite different, so yeah.
So thank you so much for that question. I think, like she was saying, that the conversations on the stage in front of you all is like over, but I think this is more like a starter. The conversation outside should keep going on. So that is also one way where you can increase and attract more women, because there are more women talking about women doing science. So that is a wonderful way where we can open the gates for much more women in STEM. And I also think for me, this book is, when we talk about empathy, vulnerability, all of that, this book is also bringing a narrative and a perspective which was missing in the whole. Like, I really liked Ghazala's story, in which she says that green is a spectrum. Like, when you're in an oak forest, green is a spectrum. So really, for me, conservation is also a spectrum. It's a very complex theme. And so far, for so many years, what we've been missing out was the narrative and perspective from our side, from the women's side. So the more diverse the spectrum is, the better the understanding of that complex system is. So that is my takeaway from all your stories. And it was wonderful to have this conversation in front of all of you. And thank you so much, Anita, for spending this time with me.